Hey friends, I'm here with Annie and Stu, who are Enneagram Fours for the EnneaSummer 2020. And I'm going to ask y'all the same question we've been asking all of our numbers. As we are walking toward this really important election, not just nationally, but locally, which is kind of a resurged conversation, how important it is to vote locally. Will y'all kind of tell me, as fours, why is voting important to you? How are you collecting information so that you can vote wisely in November?
For me, voting is important because it's a privilege. Not everybody has this privilege. It's important to me to make my voice heard. And honestly, I think that it's our responsibility to pull the people into power who are going to be making the most loving and just world. I do get a lot of my information from Twitter, but am being really much more discerning in recent months about who it is that I'm listening to, and not just blindly clicking on articles and reading a thing and taking it as truth, but comparing it with other maybe opposing, differing viewpoints. I actually think that both Annie F. Downs and Dante Stewart are great follows on Twitter if you are looking for wise information. And so, yeah, doing a lot more deep dive reading as opposed to just clicking on headlines and taking that as truth.
Yeah. What about you, Stu?
That's good. Yeah. As far as voting being incredibly important, I would agree. I think, in some sense, when we're talking about politics and the political processes, I believe that, legislation is incredibly important. And the practice of voting is incredibly important for, like what Andy said, getting the right people to represent the people, especially with rampant voter suppression. So I live in Georgia, and there's rampant voter suppression. And we, in some sense, there was a kind of dismantling of the Voting Rights Act of 65, and we need to restore that now. Voting, is a right. It's voting rights, it's a right for all people. And I think, being, a Christian, I think, it's a commitment as well. It's a, virtue and a moral commitment and a political practice. As I said all the time, as a Christian, I'm not trying to create a Christian nation. What I am trying to do is live as a Christian, trying to make, as Annie would beautifully say, a more loving and just democracy where all people experience power, dignity, and agency within our processes. And so for me, I do a lot of reading. I write on race, religion, and politics. So that's my kind of thing. I'm thinking about, the political process. I'm thinking about, who's whose platform, represents, this person, me being Black, and larger, from there, going out there. And so I guess in some sense, my information comes from podcasts and news. I look at C-SPAN. When I look at C-SPAN, and C-SPAN is incredible. And I read a lot of books on, being both a Christian and political theology. And I think, for us, it's important for us to be thinking about that, especially, as Christians, our fundamental commitment is neighbor love. If we follow Jesus, it's neighbor love. And the question becomes, how do we respond in a very public fashion to neighbors who feel unloved as a neighbor who should be loving? How can we stand in the world as building a common life with other people? And what type of policies and practices, values, and visions needs to be instituted in order for all people to feel loved in this country? The question, especially right now, is not whether, especially particularized to Black Lives Matter, it's not whether, Black Lives Matter to God. The question is, does Black Lives Matter to America and the people? So I don't care what type of hashtag people put up. I care how they, advocate in their families, in their churches, in their communities to vote in ways that embodies their values. If you believe people are valuable, then you should vote in ways that uphold that value. So
you both have a good point I want to pull out. C-SPAN is a great place to watch because it's so boring. Like the ones that pull on your emotions are trying to convince you of something. C-SPAN's just boring news. So turn to them at times. And also, Annie, you said that, and I think this is really important to all three of us. There was a point when all three of us would not have been allowed to vote. And it is exactly 100 years that women have been allowed to have their own vote. And that, I mean, I tear up every time I vote. Thinking about my ancestors who didn't get to, and how they were, purely because they were born women, they were not allowed to have a voice. And so I go every time because my great grandmother couldn't. And so it matters.
And I do think about just some people who might not like any of the options out there. People who are saying, I don't like either option. I don't we're not presented with a good option, and so I'm not going to vote at all. And I would just challenge that by saying, think about people with less privilege than you have, in whatever realm, and cast a vote on their behalf. That's what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. That there are people, who that vote would really mean a lot to, in ways that it might not affect me in particular, but it will affect others. And using my vote as a way of tangibly loving.
Yeah, that's real. That's 100. Yeah, that's 100. Especially, as I think about being Black in this country, we don't get that option of saying, hey, both sides deal. It's like, in history, who has had policies that, help us and affect us, whatnot. And, for me, I am indeed, on the progressive side, because of being a Christian and, my theological commitments and political commitments. And I think, as I've read and studied, I think, we should be thinking about, how can, everybody, as the protest song of the 70s would say, everybody got a right to live. And I think, in our country, we need to be thinking about ways how to love our neighbors through our vote. How can we stand in solidarity? It's not enough to be sympathetic towards someone's situation. Sympathy only allows us to feel bad about the situation and
actually make us feel better for not being
exactly.
It makes us feel bad so that we'll feel better. Yeah, exactly.
And the solution becomes charity. But in this country, we need justice. We need ways of thinking about power constructively in such a way where the value gap that Eddie Glaude out of Princeton would say, that we would upend the value gap, that Black lives are less valuable than other lives, that Hispanic lives are less valuable than other lives, that anybody who, lives in a given system of injustice, how can we make their realities better whereby dignity, power, and agency is restored? And so I would recommend a book.
I know you would.
I would recommend a book. It's entitled Democracy in Black by Eddie Glaude.
I read it at your recommendation. I read it.
It's an incredible book that I think will help people understand, how do we love our neighbor? I think Eddie Glaude is a great voice. I love Eddie Glaude. He's a brilliant scholar, brilliant thinker, brilliant Christian. And I think he has a lot to say. So definitely get that book in as we prepare for November.
Yeah, we have a running list on my website of resources for people, and you're actually on that list, Stu. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but your Twitter handle's on that list. But we will add that book. So, y'all, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks for having us.